when it comes to this idea of attention and the attention problem, I want to bring something up that we actually talked about in my Time Crafting Trust community. This book called Indistractable by Nir Eyal, which came out in 2019. He's got a new book out now, which I encourage you to check out. But this book is How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Number one, I love the fact that he didn't say control time or manage your time, because attention is far easier, simpler to command, control, whatever you want to say, than time, because it lives within time. Time is not something that we can manage. But the premise behind this book is this idea that how we can become indistractable, how we can keep distractions at bay. And I would argue that the common assumption is that the attention problem is distraction, but I don't think that's quite right. In my 15 plus years of studying this space, I think distraction is just the symptom. As I'm going through my notes here, I want to get this right. So the actual problem is that most people don't know where they are in their own attention at any given moment. And then they're applying effort at the wrong level. And this is where the spheres of attention come into play. They're a map. I wouldn't call them a to-do list, because you can apply them to your to-do list, but they're not a to-do list. They're not a hack either. They are a map that essentially shows you the terrain of your own focus from the outermost edge all the way into the bullseye, the innermost. So we're going to go through these 4 spheres today. They are addressed in my book, The Productivity Diet, which you can kind of see right up there. There we go, right there. But there are 4 spheres in one center. And here's the thing, most people don't get to that center consistently, and it's not because they're lazy or they're undisciplined or anything like that. It's because they never learned how to move through the layers in an intentional way. So we're going to talk about these. I want to address, before we dive into some of the other books around focus that I think are quite good and help you kind of understand where your focus goes, how to apply focus. My friend Chris Bailey wrote a book a number of years ago called Hyperfocus: How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. Great book. He talks about scatter focus. There's the limits of your attention, taming distractions. I would highly recommend that you take a look at this book. Chris is a good friend of mine and also has spent a lot of time studying the productivity space. So he's got a whole body of work. I would recommend you pick that up. And then if you have, and this is an older book here. So this book I'm going to showcase right now is from, let's see when it was published. So this is published in 1994. So while I don't know that you want to necessarily pick up this book, there are some root things that you'll find. I love going back through older books. Like, again, this is 30 plus years old, just to see where studies around this began. And so this is from Edward M. Hallowell and John J. Rady, and it's called Answers to Distraction. So they wrote the book called Driven to Distraction, and it's around attention, at this time, attention deficit disorder. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of research done that in the last 3 decades. But if you want to get to the core of some of the research around this may be a great place to start. I have a whole plethora of books here. So let's get into these spheres of attention, because they will definitely play a role in your focus. So the first sphere, when we're looking at it, the outer sphere, is noticing. So it's the widest sphere rather. Rob Walker has written a great book. I don't have it in front of me here right now, but it's called The Art of Noticing. What I love about that book and the idea of noticing is that it is something that I try to do, and I think we do automatically. But when you apply intention to it, there's some real power behind it. If I go for a walk and I notice things, if you intentionally spend time in that sphere, what'll happen is then you can dive deeper into the other spheres. Often with noticing, we'll notice it and then we'll kind of just move on, right? So it is definitely the most passive of all the spheres of attention, these 4 spheres. You're kind of picking up signals from the environment, again, whether it's the literal nature environment or just what's going on around you. And you're not really consciously engaging with any of them. Okay, so that's why when you apply intention and you kind of are more intent around it, that's where you can go deeper. Think of it as peripheral vision, right? Think of it as, the Society of Peripheral Studies. So think of it that way. So movement, it's registering, but you're not looking directly at it. So walking through a busy street, you hear the cacophony of noises. None of it really pulls you in unless something unusual happens. So, it's interesting because when I worked at Costco, and you may notice this if you're ever going to like a Costco, let's say, and I don't know if they do this as much anymore, but when I would go to Costco, when I was working there rather, in the early days, I would hear the forklifts going around. I would notice it. They stood out, but after a number of years, just blended into the background, and that's often what noticing is. Noticing would be like a notification pops up, you glance at it, you don't really open anything. So you notice something popped up, but you don't really do much with it. You're working away in a coffee shop. I'm sure many of you have done this at some point in time or another. There's noise. We often love to have that noise too. There's apps that actually can replicate the noise of a coffee shop, of nature. There's even YouTube channels that can do this. ASMR, all of these kind of things. They're noticing, but they don't really draw you in. It's all background. But like I said, noticing, it does have real value. It's where the curiosity starts, right? So it's where you get curious. You don't really judge with noticing. You just get curious. The edge of your attention is kind of caught, and that's where you can start to tap into the second sphere, of course. But really, it's because of its passive nature. You're not really even sure that it matters at this point, but there is this sense of, that happens. So, interestingly, noticing can be a problem in some ways when you are trying to fill space and time without going too deep. So I would say that scrolling is noticing with the illusion of being productive happening at the same time. So when you notice something, and this is where you don't go deep into any particular thing, you're just doing that mindless kind of scrolling thing. And that's totally fine. But when you go in with intent, you have a greater chance of actually tapping into deeper spheres of awareness, or of attention. So you have the chance to do that. But if you are just mindlessly doing it, and often that comes with when you're tired or when you're depleted from doing something that's taxing. But like just this constant scanning without progressing, there's a trap there. You end up becoming reactive and not proactive if you stay in that kind of state because you're not going any deeper. It kind of feels like engagement too. So if you're scrolling, there is this felt sense of engagement, but it's not really happening. So that's where the dangers can arise. So we all are noticing whether we want to admit it or not. It often, once you apply that intent, or once you stop and become presence, that's where you start to tap into the deeper layers of attention in the spheres. So note that we are all noticing. You may have noticed that, oh, Mike's online. Mike's doing this live stream. Okay. And then you kept going. That's happening all the time. It's when you start to dive in a bit deeper that you can really harness your focus a lot better. You can harness your attention. You can get more of the right things done. So let's talk about rather the second sphere of attention. And the second sphere of attention is awareness. Now, the interesting thing about awareness, I just literally had a conversation with Cecily Mack, who wrote the book Undimmed, talks about these 8 awarenesses. Really great conversation. It's for an upcoming episode of my podcast. Not coming up for a while, but I shared a little bit on my social media yesterday about the conversation. Really great stuff. If you have a chance to pick up her book Undimmed, I would check it out because awareness It's a heightened sense. It's an upgrade of noticing, right? So it's more active. Um, you've recognized something as relevant. So curiosity has turned into, oh, okay, what now there's a level of engagement happening. It's gone from being background noise to like, maybe I should focus on this. It's possible that it's become a point of focus. Um, and this is where the decision kind of happens. This is where you have to make a decision. So if you hear your name called across a noisy room, you weren't listening, but it lands. I think there's research around the idea that the most powerful word in the English language to us is our name. And because it draws us in, right? So when you hear your name across a crowded room, you weren't listening for it, but it popped up. You noticed it, and now you're like, okay, now what? What am I going to do with this, right? When you're scanning, let's say your email inbox, and one subject line stops you. Oh, what am I going to do with this? Again, it's that heightened sense of attention. Another thing that where awareness pops in, and this is where interaction with other people can heighten your levels of attention, how far into the spheres you're going, is if somebody changes their tone when you're speaking with them. So, and there's a level, I guess, of emotional intelligence that comes with this. But when you notice that, like there's an awareness there. Right? You notice it, and you're now, because you're actively engaged with the person in conversation. Again, you now have a decision to make. Do I change the subject? Do I change the way I'm approaching this? Again, these are just examples of where awareness comes in. So really, awareness is that filtering mechanism, because we're always noticing something, whether we're actively doing it or passively doing it. Once we shift to that active level of noticing, it's really we're tapping into awareness. So it's that filtering mechanism, though. It's where, okay, I've gone from noticing to I'm aware, right? We can't live in this sphere all the time either. This is where, I would argue that if you're thinking about hyper focus, not in the terms of what Chris Bailey's talking about in his book, but this, I think hyper awareness is just when you are skipping the noticing phase altogether. So if you're at that point, that's where you need to, hopefully you're able to tap into awareness as a filtering mechanism. I am not anyone who has studied ADHD or neurodiversity to any level. So I'm going to preface this by saying that, but I would imagine that this is likely where people who are neurodivergent and have challenges with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity is that they're in awareness so often that it pulls their focus, right? So it pulls their attention, rather. It pulls it into the deeper spheres. So, and I'd love to hear if you think that for someone who knows more about this, I'd love it if you could confirm that or debunk that or whatever. I'm more willing to be wrong on this, but I would imagine, or I think that because there's this high alertness level, and I think alert and aware are different too, but we're not going to dive into that too deeply. But noticing is passive, so it allows you to filter, because awareness is that filtration. But if you're never able to fully go back into that outer sphere of noticing, then you're always there's this hyper awareness that's going on that makes it really hard for you to clock down. So instead, you clock up. That's my thoughts around this. Janet, let me pop this up here. So awareness is like clicking on the notification for this live stream. Yes. So, I'm aware this is going on. Let's dive in a bit deeper. So yes, I would say that would be it. And then the longer you stay on the live stream, you are getting into deeper spheres of attention. You're going into those inner circles even more. Not everything that gets noticed should get more attention, which is what I just discussed. But awareness is kind of the sorting hat. It's where you're sorting. Because I guarantee you that when you got a notification that this live stream is starting, or a live stream is starting, or whatever, that's where the decision gets made. Okay, yes, I am going to move forward with this. Or, oh no, you know what? I'll watch the replay. You noticed it and then you pushed it aside, right? So there's an oscillation that takes place between noticing and awareness that's happening quite frequently, uh, more frequently than, say, the other spheres. But the state of noticing is where you're going to spend more time, and awareness is just when you're drawing higher levels of attention. But awareness is where procrastination starts to build its nest. So you've recognized, let's say, something matters, but you haven't acted. You're just kind of hovering, right? So you're not going any deeper, but you're not pushing back. You're not going, okay, well, I'll deal with this later. You're kind of sticking with it. And this is, again, back to that thought I had around neurodivergence, is that if you're always in that awareness sphere, then without a doubt, procrastination can kind of stay there because you have nowhere else to go other than deeper. And you can't go deep on everything. As the spheres of attention, the outer sphere is the widest, then the next awareness is in that much more. And then we go deeper until we get to the point where we're at that bullseye level. So procrastination loves this awareness level because there's not a lot of commitment there yet, right? You're still in that filtering phase. So it is kind of in the peripheral vision. It's basically, if we're going to use this coffee cup as a metaphor, it's like, I see the coffee cup. There are 3 different handles I can choose from. Which one do I choose? And I don't choose one. It's in your peripheral vision, this task, whatever you've noticed, but it's not just in your physical periphery, but it's up here. It's in your mental one. So you know it's there. You keep noticing it. So again, that oscillation is taking place, but you're not in it. You're not, there's not a level of immersiveness that's in it, or deep immersion. So awareness this is where a lot of people think that think that they're working on it, but just because they're aware of it, but they're not, they're just kind of orbiting it. So if you catch yourself saying, oh yeah, I'm on it, that you're aware, there's an awareness there. That's often what can happen. And when we're overwhelmed by a lot of things, we have more things that we are aware of, but there's less things that there's never going to be more, to a degree, of what we can go in deeper with those other spheres of attention. Awareness it's kind of again, between noticing and awareness is, noticing is passive, awareness is the filtration. Now we get into the third sphere of attention, which is where focus is a choice. But before we do that, Janet, let's pop in. So I think you're right. I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but I have a lot of the traits. And, Janet, you bring up a really interesting point, because we have these task management tools. I'll use myself as an example. So I use ClickUp for for the business stuff, and Todoist for personal, just to keep those things separate. I probably could go ahead and just use reminders, like Apple's reminders, for the personal, and ClickUp for business, or I could probably just use Todoist for business at this point if I scaled things back. But the interesting thing is that if I was to go into ClickUp and look at everything, or even Todoist to look at everything, there's a lot of things that I am, quote, aware of. This is why I think these tools are helpful. And this is why I think, having that distinction between a calendar and a to-do list are really helpful, because a calendar creates awareness around very specific times of day, days of week, months of year, days, all that stuff. A to-do list is a place where those tasks live, where you may not have assigned a date or a time or what have you to them, which is largely what should happen. And with time crafting, you can kind of combine those in that, okay, well, if Thursday is my transmission day, which it is for me, what are my transmission tasks? Oh, there they all are. And then I would sort them by, these are the ones that I want to get done first. These are the ones I'm prioritizing versus these ones can wait until the next Thursday when I see it, so on and so forth. So you draw that connective tissue between the calendar and the to-do list. But I don't work off that list, either of those lists, as often or throughout the day if I'm trying to keep my attention, if I'm trying to dive deeper into these other spheres of attention. So this is a nice segue into the third and fourth sphere. So I will use paper for that. Now, for some, it might seem redundant to do that, to take, you have it in the digital tool, just leave it there. But the problem is that there's so many things I can notice and or be aware of inside of that digital tool. And I don't want that. I want to dive deeper. So I will move those tasks that I want to go deeper with, that I want to definitely commit to. I will move those to the paper so that they stand out. I know they exist. I'm aware they exist in the digital space, but I want them to be in the analog space because there's only so much I can go deeper with into those spheres. So I think that used judiciously, digital task management tools, no matter which ones you use, are wise because they keep those awareness items there so that you can tap into those deeper spheres if you so choose and when you so choose. But they can act as an aid to filter those things. So you can apply things like tags or dates or priority levels or what have you, whatever way you want to approach that. And then your job, which is what we can struggle with, is to find a way to filter those out so that you don't see them, which you could do in the digital task apps. You could do that for sure. You could say, I only want to see these views. Absolutely. I choose not to do that. I choose to bring them into paper because then I can take it with me and I can dive deeply into what's going on up here in the mechanisms as opposed to the digital realm. So I can totally do that. So that's why I think things like the bullet journal, the bullet journal is helpful, I believe, in that regard. But the one place that it would lack would be the speed of filtration based on, I think what the bullet journal can do for some is it can become a source of tinkering. It can become a source of scanning. You go back to, you go back to that scanning, right? And so if you're looking at analog, it's harder to see unless you have some kind of identifiers as to what should happen, or discipline, willfulness, whatever you want to apply there. But with the digital tools, you could set it up so that you can only see these things. So you're kind of doing some front end work. So I'm not saying either is wrong or right, but what works is digital for the master kind of everything. And then paper is where I filter down. So whether I'm using, again, I've got a little weekly planner, whether I'm using like index cards or what have you, whatever you use, you could bring that down into that. And I think you could use a bullet journal in concert with a digital task app as well. So by virtue of what I'm saying is, if you are somebody that's using a digital task app, those are really helpful for capturing the things you notice and keeping those things you want to be aware of where you need them to be. Now we dive into the spheres 3 and 4. That's where I think analog can be super helpful, unless you're willing to set up some kind of filters in the task app tools themselves. So let's talk about the third sphere, focus. So we've gone from noticing to awareness to now focus. And focus is the choice. But there's a cost, as you know, to every choice, right? So focus is really the first sphere where you've made a conscious decision. And in my new book, Productiveness, I talk about what's called the productiveness ROI. And interestingly, it pairs nicely with the spheres of attention because there's the things you might do, there's the things you can do, there's the things you must do, and the things you will do. I would marry the things you might and can to noticing and awareness. And then once you shift them into focus and then the final sphere, that's where they become must and wills. So it's that level of commitment. You're going from curiosity to commitment, really. So you've selected something as the primary object of your attention. You're now committing cognitive resources. So you're going deeper. So let's talk about the things that, when you're in this focus sphere, where, like, some examples around that. So reading a book and actually absorbing the meaning, not just skimming. So sitting and reading, right? Or sitting and listening, like really focusing on it, right? That would be one. Writing an email with very clear intent. So you're focused on an email itself, or you're focused in your email inbox itself. Like, again, you're committing focus. You're not just randomly firing things off. You're actually going deeper with it. And that's, I think, what happens a lot is we'll go into our email inbox and we never really, when we're trying to get to inbox zero, we're kind of hovering between awareness and focus. Initially, I think we're just at awareness. And then we'll go back in and then dive deeper, as opposed to going into email when you're only saying, I'm going to focus on email right now. Because again, you can't stay in that sphere of focus, just like, you can't stay there, right? The only one you can really stay in and go back to is noticing, because it's so passive. So if you're focusing on your email consistently and your job is not just email, then there's a cost to that. We're going to get to that in a minute. Listening to someone actively speaking with you and not rehearsing your response. I'm bad for that still. I'm working on that. And the reason that I'm bad for that, I think, has a lot to do with my background in improvisation, in that, which you'd think would be like, Mike, no, but you're supposed to actively listen. The way I approached improvisation early on was thinking ahead in that moment to take. So I would listen, but at the same time say, okay, where am I going to take this? And I think that can happen with improvisation without, and the best kind of improvisation, where the magic really can happen, is when you're actively listening and then you just react or respond. And that, to me, is an area that I still work on. If you listen to my podcast, I'm getting better at that too. After so many episodes, you think I would. So there is that too. And one thing I'm really trying to do is focus on their eyes, the person I'm talking to, and not their mouth. I don't know why I've always been the person that I've focused on their mouth, but I'm really trying to look them in the eyes, which is challenging. Focus is where real progress happens, though. So once you're there, that's where you're going to get to see tangible progress. But it does require that two things: intentionality and an environment that supports it. So if you don't have both, then you're going to drift back into awareness. So I shared on social media earlier this week that I brought my phone and a foldable keyboard and a stand to a coffee shop. And I was going to write. And I did do a bit of writing. But if I did not have that keyboard and stand, I would have probably drifted back into awareness, because the phone on its own, I could do so much with, right? Just like you could. Same thing. If I and I didn't want to bring my iPad, because the iPad I could do that with as well, but I knew that the iPad was going to be bulky. I didn't want to bring it because I was just going out for a walk. I wasn't going to bring a whole messenger bag. So by bringing those other two things, which fit into my jacket pocket, there was intent okay, I'm bringing this keyboard because I want to sit and write, and the stand because I want it to be propped up. I'm going to actually not have my hands on the phone. I'm going to focus on writing. Now, to be clear, I didn't decide what writing I was going to do, but I knew I was going to write. So there is some intentionality there, and I had the environment support. Now, it doesn't have to always be tools, right? It could be a place. It could be mentally where you need to be. Environment could be like, if you're looking at your calendar, for example, I'm a night owl. So the environment needs to be that for me to really dive deeply into creative work. For some of you, it might be mornings, right? So those things matter. And you don't always notice that it's happening when you drift back into awareness either. The way that you can catch yourself is, weirdly enough, by stopping and pausing, and weirdly enough, noticing. Hey, hold on a second. I'm drifting back. Like, I need to focus on this stuff. How do I do that? That's why they have tools to help with this. I'm testing a tool. One of my video this week, I'll put a link to it up here. Was the Focusor, which is a tool designed to help you focus. And I've got plenty of those. I'm sure you've seen many of them too. You could even do that with your phone or whatever. So the interesting thing about the cost angle, though, is it does cost something. Focus costs things like energy, which is why I think it's important to align it with your body clock as much as possible. Low intensity tasks don't take up as much energy for me, so I will do those earlier in the day. I will focus on those tasks earlier in the day. High intensity tasks, they're for later in the day. There's got to be a willingness to do things like close other tabs, both literal and mental. You've got to be willing to, and that's where, again, trust in your tools and your system is helpful. I mean, Janet just brings up here, again, an example. Like for email, I use awareness to just delete the obvious junk. Then when I have time to focus, I'll go through the remaining emails more intentionally. That's something you can trust. You have to have trust. So whether it's you trust in the bullet journal, it'll tell you where and what to devote your attention to and to what level, the digital tools, all of this. If you have that in place, then the cost is not as high because you can rely on finding what's next, getting back to what needs to happen. There's a reason that people resist committing to focus, and because once you're there, you're actually accountable to the task. In the Time Crafting Trust community, we have what are called focus fix sessions. And I didn't really think about the term too deeply. My friend Angela Crocker came up with the name, which I ran with, so hat tip to her. But I didn't really think about the spheres of attention didn't really exist to the same degree when I came up and when we started to do that inside the community. But in those sessions, and they've evolved over the years too, we dedicate anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours, depending on the day, to focus on something. So people can join in. It's a co-working session, for lack of a better term. And what we try to do is at the very beginning, we'll say whoever's facilitating the session, we'll say, what are you going to fix your focus on? Or what are you going to focus on? Or what are you going to do? Like whatever their phrasing they want to use. And then the person will say, they'll declare it. Then we do the focus, and whoever's facilitating is in charge of the timer. And once the timer goes off, they bring us back in. And then they say, okay, well, how'd you do? And it doesn't, I mean, in all honesty, some folks will drift into something else. Something will have popped up. Something will distract or disrupt them. And others will dedicate their focus to that task that they set. Some will go broad and say, I'm going to fix my focus on this project, which allows them a lot of flexibility to whatever tasks live within that project. I can tell you that when we have the early focus fix sessions, people know that I'm going to focus on low intensity tasks. So that gives me a wide array of projects to look at, but I'll only look at the low intensity tasks in those, so on and so forth. Why I bring this up is that that third sphere of attention involves that accountability. You're accounting yourself. So when you come back to one of those sessions and we say, how'd you do? If you didn't do it, didn't say what you set out to do, you're going to explain why. Because there is some level of accountability there. And we do these twice daily during weekdays. And like I said, the Monday is always a 2-hour session. And this is as of this recording, so if you check out the community, you'll see what may have changed since this live stream. But interestingly, and you can shift from one to the other, so you can use Pomodoros if you want or what have you. But I didn't think about the term focus when, like, what that meant in the spheres of attention. But we're never quite, we don't call it like awareness activities or noticing or whatever. Maybe we should call them like attention time or whatever, because you can dip into that fourth sphere of attention. We'll come back to this in a moment. But with focus, if you're doing that accountability is what can essentially, it's what procrastination in the awareness sphere is often avoiding. So once you tap into that third sphere, like, okay, I'm committing to this. If we're going to use the productiveness ROI parlance, I must do this. I will do this. And that means you're going to make progress. Now, there is one sphere that's deeper. And so if we come back to this, my coffee cup, we've talked about 3 spheres: noticing, awareness, focus. But how many handles does a typical coffee cup have? 1. Or none, I guess. But the vessel, if anything, actually, you could even just say the vessel itself. The fourth sphere of attention, it's the bullseye. And I remember watching Ted Lasso and learning about darts for the first time. And I always thought you had to hit the bullseye every single time, which is why the spheres of attention kind of works for me as well, because you can't, not only in darts, you don't hit the bullseye every time. You shouldn't. That's my understanding. Again, still don't play darts, but when I watch Ted Lasso, I'm like, oh, wow. But what's interesting is that that's not necessarily what this fourth sphere is. It's not always the bullseye. It's where you're going to concentrate your attention. And that's the fourth sphere, concentration. It is essentially the one that is the most fragile and worth protecting. So it is full immersion. This is where, if you're in flow, that's what this is. Time is distorting, right? You can't tell how much time has passed. When you are in concentration, when you are in that fourth sphere, you are in essentially a state of flow. The work, it feels close to effortless, or your engagement with the work feels close to effortless. At the very least, it flows. Okay. Again, that flow state, you're not getting there with the first 3. But once you're concentrated, and you can't stay in this either. You can't stay in concentration, but it's where your most complex thinking and creating happens. So here's some examples. A writer who looks up and realizes that 3 hours has passed. A live streamer that is on YouTube and looks and says, oh, wow, we've been on for 50 minutes. A musician that's fully immersed inside the music, not performing it, but just living it, inhabiting it. An athlete that responds instinctively without thinking each movement. I remember reading The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh, the well-known 49ers coach who used to be a coach for the Bengals. And there was a missed opportunity the Bengals had, but that's neither here nor there. And as a Bengals fan, it still irks me to this day. But they talk about like the fundamentals or the things that they do automatically. It's when an athlete is so immersed in that, then the instincts kind of take over, right? This is where the best work lives. It's the breakthroughs, the problems that actually get solved. It's the ideas worth having. All of that lives in concentration. But it takes time to get there. Again, the focus fix sessions that we have in the community. What I love about them is they are containers for time, 50 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. And so they're protected. So if you commit to something in it, you can go from focus to concentration. And I can tell you, and I know Janet's been in a few of these as well, because Janet's a member of Time Crafting Trust, that sometimes when we're pulled out of those focus fix, when the timer goes off, people will go like, oh, they'll jump. Because they are so immersed, they're so deep in concentration that time it flew. And they're still in it. They were still in it. So we're breaking their breaking their concentration. So while it takes a long time to get there, it takes almost nothing to leave, like to get out of it. So one interruption, which is why mitigating like things like distractions and disruptions as much as possible before they lead to diversions are really helpful. They aid in helping you get to this sphere. Like a notification, a knock at the door, one context switch, just moving from one to the other. That takes you back outside of that sphere. Now you've dipped back down. And by the way, you don't necessarily dip back down to focus and awareness. You don't go back down through 3 to 2 to 1. Often when you leave concentration, you don't go back to focus. You go back to awareness or even noticing. And then you have to work your way back in. Most environments are not, most people who do this, they don't have an environment to help support this state. So retreats, which we're going to be talking about next time in the Lantern Lyceum session, retreats are great for this because you've set the environment up and you've got everything ready so you can spend more time in this sphere. You can get there with more efficacy. So what most people do, and this is, I think, where space and time intersect, is when most people look at their calendar or their schedules, they don't have it set up to protect the space where concentration can live. So that's why when I'm working with members of our community, I'll say, these focus fix sessions are there for you. Just block them off, like use them for something deliberate. Like later today, when I go in to the second focus fix session of the day, my horizontal theme for that is learning. So I will spend my time learning. I have got that hour there, so that's what I'm going to fix my focus on. And ideally, I'll get to concentration. We don't stumble upon concentration. It doesn't just happen when it's needed. It just doesn't work like that. So as we wrap up here, it's really about movement. That's the skill. Movement between these spheres. Deliberate, intentional movement. Paying attention to your attention. Remember, somebody said that once before, and I can't remember who, but I know that someone has said that. Paying attention to your attention. The point isn't to live in concentration because you can't. The point is knowing how to move through the spheres intentionally And then stopping the slide in the other direction from being unconscious. So when you slip out of those inner spheres, how do you get back there? What happened to pull you out of them? Each sphere has legitimate value. Noticing, it keeps you open. I would challenge you to read Rob Walker's book, The Art of Noticing, or check out his work. This is what he talks about. Awareness, it helps you filter. As I said, it helps you look at those things you've noticed and, okay, well, what matters? Where do I want to go? Where do I want my attention to be tapped into? Focus is where that engagement begins. There's a commitment level. It's where you go from, oh, this is nice, to this is being done. This is something I'm going to work on. So from this is there to this is now. And then concentration is where you do your most meaningful work. And that's why you hear writers, creatives, entrepreneurs who will protect massive swaths of time on their calendar because they know that it takes time to get to that level, that sphere. And by protecting it and keeping it open, you know that you're not going to, because you can't rush into it. You can't force it to fit into a certain container. So you give yourself enough with the idea, with the theory, with the concept that you'll be able to tap into it sometime within that frame. So what breaks down is when people get stuck in the wrong sphere for the wrong task. So there's effort can suffer, quality, of course, can suffer as a result. And the world we live in, by the way, asking us to do, go, check. It doesn't value those other spheres as they should. In other words, noticing and awareness, because we spend more time in there, the effort required to get those things done at a level of higher quality is low or lower. So we spend time checking off boxes from there. And then we get more done. So we feel like we've been productive initially. But then when we look wider, like, I wonder what happened here. So protecting, like creating that environment for focus and concentration is something that we need to do. It's not going to be something that the world gives us. We need to do it. But we also need to live in the world we live in, so we need to figure out a way to do it within those parameters. That's tricky. I don't have an answer for that. Every answer is nuanced around that. So the other thing is people will mistake one phase for another, or one sphere rather for another. So thinking they're focused when they're not, or they're still in awareness, thinking noticing is somehow getting things done. So there's that too. So all I'm asking you, which is a lot, is after checking this out, is to pay more attention to your attention. Invest more attention in your attention. The spheres of attention are really a diagnostic. You just use them to ask, where am I right now? Is that where I want to be or need to be? Maybe. That question, like asking those questions alone will change how you work. And you need time and space to do that. And you don't need to take a lot of time to do that either. Like those questions aren't, I'm not asking you to write an essay on those. I'm just asking you to say, again, noticing, asking. So with that in mind, we'll wrap things up. Thanks again so much for taking the time to be here. And until next time, remember, stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.